In 1967, Chevrolet did something almost unbelievable. It put one of its most serious racing engines on a Corvette order sheet, and then did everything it could to make sure ordinary customers didn't actually want one. The engine was called the L88. On paper, it was just a 427 making 430 horsepower. Less than Chevrolet's 435 horsepower L71. But that number was a trap. Underneath the aluminum heads was a 12.5-to-1 compression ratio, a radical solid lifter camshaft, huge rectangular ports, an 850 CFM Holley carburetor, and enough breathing capacity to produce well over 500 horsepower when properly fed and tuned. Some period and modern estimates put a properly prepared L88 around 550 horsepower or more, and Chevrolet knew exactly what it had created. This wasn't really a street engine, it was a race engine that happened to come with license plates. But here's the part most people miss. Chevrolet didn't simply refuse to sell it. The company used a much smarter strategy. It made the L88 expensive, inconvenient, uncomfortable, and deceptively weak on paper, and somehow that made it even more legendary. The story begins with Zora Arkus Duntov. By the middle of the 1960s, Duntov had one obsession: turning the Corvette into a serious international racing machine. The Corvette was already fast, but fast wasn't enough. Ferrari was building purpose-built sports cars. Ford was developing the GT40. Porsche was becoming a force in endurance racing. Chevrolet needed something that could survive when the throttle stayed pinned for hours, and Duntov knew the answer had to start with the engine. Duntov wasn't just an engineer, he was a racer. He understood what happened when marketing departments built cars versus what happened when engineers who actually competed built them. And he had been frustrated for years. Corporate politics at General Motors had created barriers. The AMA racing ban from 1957 had forced manufacturers to publicly distance themselves from motorsports. But Duntov understood something critical. Racing didn't just sell cars, it proved them. And if the Corvette was going to be taken seriously in Europe, it needed to finish races that destroyed lesser machines. That meant durability. That meant cooling. That meant an engine that could make power hour after hour without grenading itself. The foundation was Chevrolet's Mark IV big block. The L88 displaced 427 cubic inches, or about 7.0 liters. Its bore measured roughly 4.25 inches with a 3.76-inch stroke. Those numbers matter. The huge bore allowed Chevrolet to install enormous valves and create large rectangular intake ports. The relatively short stroke helped the engine breathe at high RPM. This wasn't an engine designed around effortless low-speed cruising. It was designed to inhale, and inhale it did. The L88 used aluminum cylinder heads, a high-flow aluminum intake, a single 850 CFM Holley 4-barrel, forged internal components, 4-bolt mains, and a solid lifter camshaft with far more aggressive timing than Chevrolet's ordinary street engines. The valve sizes were massive. Intake valves measured 2.19 inches. Exhaust valves came in at 1.72 inches. For context, those were enormous even by racing standards of the era. The rectangular intake ports flowed dramatically more air than conventional designs. And the aluminum heads weren't just about weight savings, they conducted heat differently than cast iron. That mattered when the engine was being pushed to its limits lap after lap. Then came the compression ratio, approximately 12.5 to 1. That was enormous for a production Corvette, and it came with a consequence. Pump gas wasn't what this engine wanted. The L88 demanded high-octane racing fuel. Contemporary accounts commonly cite 103-octane fuel for the full performance setup. Imagine buying a brand new Corvette and discovering that the engine wasn't really happy with the gasoline your neighbors were putting into their cars. You couldn't just pull into any service station. You had to plan. You had to find racing fuel. You had to accept that casual driving wasn't what this machine was built for. But the fuel was only the beginning. The camshaft was brutal. At idle, the engine didn't purr. It shook. It sounded angry. The lope was unmistakable. People who heard it knew immediately that something different lived under that hood. And at higher RPM, the big block came alive. The factory rating said 430 horsepower at 5,200 revolutions per minute and around 460 pound-feet of torque, but those numbers were deliberately conservative. The engine's real potential was dramatically higher, with period estimates and later testing putting properly prepared examples in the 500-plus horsepower range. Motor Trend has described the L88 as producing over 550 horsepower around 7,400 revolutions per minute in suitable race trim. Some enthusiasts and historians believe the underrating was even more extreme. Dyno tests conducted years later on original, unmodified L88 engines have shown output well beyond the factory claims. So why would Chevrolet advertise only 430? Because Chevrolet didn't want the average Corvette buyer choosing it. And that's where the L88 story gets really strange. In 1967, the normal street performance king was the L71. It made a factory-rated 435 horsepower. It had 3 two-barrel carburetors, it looked spectacular, and it was actually cheaper. The L71 option cost roughly $437. The L88 option cost $947. That's more than twice the price. And Chevrolet advertised the L88 as making 5 horsepower less. Think about that. A customer walks into a Chevrolet dealership. The salesman points to the 435 horsepower L71. Then he points to the 430 horsepower L88. One looks like a street engine. The other costs more than twice as much. Which one are you choosing? Chevrolet had engineered the comparison perfectly. The L88 wasn't being marketed as the faster Corvette. It was being hidden in plain sight. The pricing strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. Nearly $1,000 in 1967 was serious money. That was more than some people paid for an entire used car. And you were supposed to spend it on an engine that made less horsepower than the cheaper option? It made no sense, unless you knew what you were really buying. But there was another problem. The L88 didn't just give you more power, it took things away. A 1967 L88 Corvette could be ordered with the heater and defroster deleted. The car's radio wasn't part of the package, air conditioning wasn't available, power steering wasn't available, the fan shroud was omitted, and the engine bay itself looked different from a comfortable street Corvette. Chevrolet wasn't adding luxury, it was removing weight. Every unnecessary component was considered a liability. The heater and its associated hardware added pounds, the radio added pounds, air conditioning added significant weight and robbed power through the accessory drive. Power steering took energy from the engine. This wasn't about making the car pleasant, it was about making it competitive. The message was obvious. This car wasn't built for cruising. It was built to go racing. And then Chevrolet made the customer buy a collection of other performance equipment along with it. Heavy-duty brakes, special suspension, pause traction, transistorized ignition, and critically, the M22 close-ratio 4-speed manual transmission, the famous Rock Crusher. The M22 got its nickname from the sound it made. The gears were straight cut for strength, and they whined under load. It was loud, it was mechanical, it was honest. So the L88 wasn't really an engine option. It was almost a factory race car package disguised as a production option. But here's where the legend gets slightly distorted. The claim that Chevrolet dealers literally refused to sell every L88 isn't quite accurate. The L88 could be ordered through Chevrolet dealers. Some dealers actively discouraged customers from ordering one. And Chevrolet itself clearly tried to steer ordinary buyers toward less extreme engines. Stories from the era tell of salesmen asking pointed questions. What are you going to do with it? Do you understand what you're ordering? Have you raced before? Some dealers simply refused to complete the paperwork. Others demanded that buyers sign waivers acknowledging the car's intended purpose. But the company still had to build and sell enough examples to satisfy racing homologation requirements, and that created a bizarre situation. Chevrolet needed the L88 to exist. It just didn't want thousands of them on American streets. So how do you sell a racing engine without actually advertising it as the monster it is? You make it look less powerful than the engine next to it, and you make it miserable to live with. It worked. In 1967, only 20 L88 Corvettes were built. 20 out of nearly 23,000 Corvettes produced that year. That's not a performance option, that's a factory secret. 20 cars, 20 buyers who either knew exactly what they were getting or learned very quickly. Because the L88 had a way of teaching lessons, hard lessons, but the real test wasn't the dealership, it was the racetrack. And that's where the L88 finally stopped pretending. In 1968, an L88 Corvette entered the 24 Hours of Daytona and immediately demonstrated why the engine existed. The Sunray DX oil Corvette, driven by Jerry Grant and Dave Morgan, finished first in the GT class and 10th overall. It reached approximately 194 miles per hour. Think about what that meant in 1968. This wasn't a modern supercar with computerized traction control, active aerodynamics, carbon brakes, and a six-figure development budget. It was an American V8 stuffed into a Corvette, and it was approaching 200 miles per hour. That speed wasn't just impressive, it was terrifying. The Corvette's aerodynamics weren't designed in a wind tunnel with computational fluid dynamics. The brakes were mechanical, not computer-assisted. The tires were primitive by modern standards. And yet the L88 kept pulling. But Daytona wasn't just about top speed, it was about surviving. 24 hours. Engine temperature, oil temperature, gear changes, braking, fuel stops, driver fatigue. Every component had to keep working. And the L88 had been designed around exactly that kind of punishment. The cooling system was critical. The engine used a high-capacity aluminum radiator, heavy-duty hoses, a robust water pump, and careful attention to airflow through the engine bay. Because when you're making over 500 horsepower for hours at a time, heat becomes the enemy. One failed hose could end the race, one coolant leak could destroy the engine, one moment of overheating could warp the aluminum heads. But endurance racing has a way of exposing weaknesses. At the 1968 Daytona race, another L88 Corvette was leading its GT class at lap 260 when a cylinder head bolt problem killed the engine. That's the brutal side of racing. 500 plus horsepower doesn't care about your reputation. If a small component fails, the entire machine can become scrap metal. And yet the surviving L88s proved something important. The basic architecture worked. The engine could produce enormous power without sacrificing the durability required for serious competition. That was the real genius. Chevrolet hadn't simply made a big engine. It had built an engine that could breathe hard, rev hard, and survive hard. And the racing world noticed. Privateer teams began turning L88 Corvettes into weapons. One of the most famous names attached to the program was Don Yanko. Yanko understood what Chevrolet had effectively placed in his hands. A factory-supported race engine without a traditional factory racing program. The Corvette could enter competition through private teams. Chevrolet could maintain plausible distance, and the L88 could do the talking. On American circuits, these cars became terrifying. At Sebring, at Watkins Glen, at road courses across the country, L88 Corvettes were proving that American V8s could do more than just accelerate in a straight line. They could corner, they could brake, they could last. The combination was simple. A 427 cubic inch big block, huge valves, high flow heads, 1.25-to-1 compression, solid lifters, a radical camshaft, an 850 CFM carburetor, close ratio gearing, positive traction, heavy-duty brakes, and a chassis that had been upgraded to handle the violence. The engine was the heart of it, but the entire Corvette had been turned into a system, and that's why the L88 became so dangerous on the street. Imagine what happens when you take an engine designed to make its best power at high RPM and put it in a car with no power steering, no air conditioning, no heater, no radio, and a clutch connected to a close ratio 4-speed. Now imagine doing that on ordinary roads, in traffic, in the rain, with cold tires. Suddenly, the horsepower isn't the impressive part. The lack of forgiveness is. The L88 didn't have to be trying to kill you. It just didn't care if you made a mistake. That distinction matters because the L88 wasn't dangerous because Chevrolet built it badly. It was dangerous because Chevrolet built it honestly. It gave the engine what a race engine needed: air, compression, RPM, fuel, and as little compromise as possible. Stories from period owners describe the experience. The clutch was heavy, the steering required real effort at low speeds, the engine ran hot in stop-and-go traffic, the idle was so rough that the whole car vibrated, and the performance? Explosive, violent, intoxicating. By 1968, production increased to 80 cars. Then came 1969. Chevrolet built 116 L88 Corvettes that year. That brought total production across 1967, 1968, and 1969 to just 216 cars. 216. That's the entire factory-built L88 Corvette story. And every year, Chevrolet continued the same basic philosophy. Don't make it comfortable. Don't make it easy. Don't advertise its real power. Make the buyer prove they actually want it. There was a reason. Chevrolet's regular Corvette buyers wanted a fast sports car. L88 buyers wanted something different. They wanted a weapon, and the distinction became even clearer when you look at the engine's relationship with racing fuel. A compression ratio around 12.5 to 1 increases the engine's thermal efficiency and potential power, but it also increases the risk of detonation if the fuel can't withstand the pressure and heat. In simple terms, the mixture is being squeezed extremely hard before ignition. Use the wrong fuel and combustion can happen too violently. The result can be destructive. Pistons can suffer, bearings can take punishment. The engine can turn a spectacular exhaust note into a very expensive pile of metal. That was the price of the L88's performance. And finding 103 octane fuel in 1967 wasn't like stopping at a modern gas station. You had to know where to look. Airport fuel, racing suppliers, special orders. Some owners mixed their own fuel combinations to achieve the necessary octane. It was a commitment. Every time you wanted to drive the car hard, you had to plan ahead. And then there was heat. A big block producing hundreds of horsepower doesn't just create motion, it creates enormous amounts of waste heat. That's one reason the L88 received serious cooling hardware. Chevrolet knew the engine couldn't simply be treated like a normal 427. This was a race engine living inside a production car, and every time someone pushed it hard, the cooling system was fighting physics. The engine generated more heat than a standard Corvette's cooling system could handle. That's why the heavy-duty radiator wasn't optional. That's why careful maintenance was critical. That's why owners learned to watch their temperature gauges like their lives depended on it. Because in a sense, the engine's life did. That's also why stories about the L88 being a street car miss the point. It was street legal. That isn't the same thing. The L88 was closer to a competition machine that happened to satisfy the rules for public sale. And that was exactly what Chevrolet needed. The Corvette could compete in international GT racing. It could meet homologation requirements. Privateer teams could race it. And Chevrolet didn't have to sell thousands. The result was one of the most unusual factory performance strategies in American automotive history. Chevrolet built an engine powerful enough to embarrass almost anything on the road. Then it put a smaller number on the paperwork. Then it charged nearly $1,000 for the option in 1967. Then it removed comfort features. Then it forced buyers into expensive supporting equipment. And finally, it let racing success create the legend. By the time people understood what the L88 really was, it was already becoming untouchable. And that's why the 216 examples matter so much today. Most muscle cars were built to be sold. The L88 was built to qualify. There is a difference, and that difference is worth millions now. Original L88 Corvettes have become some of the most valuable American cars ever built. Auction prices have climbed into 7 figures. Collectors understand the rarity. They understand the racing history. They understand that only 216 were ever built. And they understand that this was Chevrolet's way of building a race car without actually admitting it. The engine's legacy also became bigger than the cars themselves. The L88 helped establish Chevrolet's reputation for creating factory big blocks that could blur the line between showroom equipment and competition hardware. It also became part of the foundation for later Chevrolet racing engines. The lessons learned from the L88 influenced everything that came after. the ZL1 engine, the modern Z06 and ZR1 Corvettes. All of them carry DNA from Duntov's original vision. The 427 era eventually gave way to the 454. The muscle car world changed, emissions rules tightened, insurance costs climbed, fuel requirements changed. Manufacturers could no longer build engines with the same disregard for street manners. The era was ending, but the L88 had already done what it came to do. It proved that Chevrolet could build a race engine, hide its real potential behind a conservative rating, and put it into the hands of customers willing to accept the consequences. And maybe that's the strangest part of the entire story. Chevrolet didn't need to tell the world how powerful the L88 was. The racetrack did it for them. Every finish, every victory, every time an L88 Corvette crossed the line ahead of cars that cost twice as much. That was the real advertising: a 427 cubic inch big block, a 4.25 inch bore, a 3.76 inch stroke, around 12.5 to 1 compression, aluminum heads, an 850 CFM Holley, a radical solid lifter cam, more than 500 horsepower when properly prepared, and only 216 factory-built Corvette examples over 3 years. The L88 wasn't the engine Chevrolet wanted everyone to buy. It was the engine Chevrolet wanted the right people to discover. And once those people discovered it, they didn't need a brochure. They needed a racetrack. That's the hidden truth behind the legend. The L88 wasn't dangerous because Chevrolet accidentally built too much power. It was dangerous because Chevrolet deliberately built a race engine and then disguised it as a Corvette option. The 430 horsepower rating was the camouflage. The uncomfortable cabin was the warning. The $947 price tag was the deterrent. And the 427 itself was the truth. If you enjoyed this story, let me know what forgotten American engine deserves the same treatment next. Because the L88 wasn't the only factory-built monster that Chevrolet tried to keep away from ordinary buyers. And make sure you subscribe, because some of the wildest engines in American history weren't hidden in secret workshops. They were sitting right there on the dealer's order sheet, waiting for someone reckless enough to check the box.